After a year of legal separation and absolutely zero contact, my estranged husband begged me to attend a quiet reconciliation dinner for the sake of our 3-year-old son. He said he wanted to make things right. When I opened the heavy oak doors to the private VIP room at Atlanta's most expensive steakhouse, I was greeted by 30 cheering guests, towering platters of lobster, empty bottles of $600 champagne, and a bill for nearly $7,000. He smirked and announced to the entire room that I was paying. He thought he had trapped a desperate, unemployed single mother. He had no idea he was trying to play a woman who secretly owned a $5 million commercial real estate empire. What I did next cost him absolutely everything. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and I have spent the last 12 months silently healing from the financial and emotional wounds my estranged husband DeAndre inflicted on me. As a commercial real estate developer, I managed to escape his toxic shadow to build a highly successful firm from the ground up. I kept my newly acquired wealth entirely hidden, staying off social media to protect my peace. To DeAndre and his incredibly status-obsessed family, I was still the struggling, broken woman they had eagerly pushed out of her own home a year ago. When DeAndre sent me a text message earlier this week, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in my stomach. He claimed that he and our toddler Trey missed me terribly. He suggested we meet for a quiet, intimate dinner at a high-end steakhouse downtown, insisting we needed to discuss co-parenting in a healthy environment. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I wanted Trey to see his parents having a peaceful conversation. I dressed in a simple, unbranded black dress, wanting to keep the evening as low profile and grounded as possible. The steakhouse was exactly the kind of place DeAndre loved, a dimly lit, velvet-lined establishment where power and money were aggressively put on display. The hostess greeted me with a polished smile and escorted me past the main dining area toward the exclusive private rooms in the back. I expected to push open the door and find my estranged husband sitting quietly with our little boy, perhaps sharing a basket of bread. Instead, as the hostess pulled the heavy door open, a wall of deafening noise slammed into me. The room erupted in loud cheers, applause, and the clinking of crystal glasses. There was no quiet table for three. The private banquet room was dominated by a massive, elongated table, packed tightly with 30 people. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood frozen on the threshold, taking in the chaotic scene. DeAndre had invited his entire fraternity chapter, loud and boisterous in their tailored suits. Sitting right next to him was his mother Brenda, wearing an oversized church hat and a flashy sequined dress that screamed for attention. Beside her was my sister-in-law Jada, holding a smartphone mounted on a glowing ring light. Scattered around the rest of the table were the most prominent gossips from Brenda's church choir, all looking at me with thinly veiled amusement. The sheer excess displayed across the mahogany table was staggering. Towering seafood plateaus holding dozens of empty oyster shells and cracked lobster claws served as centerpieces. Massive tomahawk steaks, half-eaten plates of rich Wagyu beef, and mounds of truffle macaroni and cheese cluttered the space in front of every single guest. At least 5 empty Magnum bottles of imported French champagne were lined up down the center of the table like trophies. DeAndre sat at the very head of the room, leaning back in his leather chair with his suit jacket draped over the back and his sleeves rolled up to expose his expensive gold watch. He was playing the role of the wealthy, generous provider, laughing loudly at a joke one of his fraternity brothers had just made. I immediately scanned the room for my son. My little boy Trey was sitting in a high chair pushed into the far corner of the room, isolated from the massive feast. He was quietly eating a small bowl of tomato soup, completely ignored by the 30 chaotic adults celebrating around him. A fierce wave of maternal protectiveness washed over me. I stepped fully into the room, my eyes locking onto DeAndre. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, stood up, and flashed me that charming, arrogant smile that used to make me question my own sanity. Now it just made my stomach churn. Before DeAndre could even speak, his mother Brenda pushed her chair back and stood up. Brenda was a woman who used her position as the head of the church choir as a weapon to judge everyone else's morality. She looked me up and down, her eyes pausing on my plain black dress with unconcealed disgust. Glad to see you finally left that depressing little apartment, Nia Brenda announced. Her voice was specifically projected to cut through the chatter, ensuring the entire room was listening. DeAndre told us you finally got approved for your unemployment checks. It is only right you buy us dinner to celebrate him letting you back into his life and showing you what true Black excellence looks like. The room fell into a tense hush, punctuated by a few snickers from Jada and her influencer friends. I stood perfectly still, letting her vicious words wash over me. In a matter of seconds, the entire manipulative scheme clicked into place. This dinner was a calculated trap. DeAndre had been lying to his family and his friends for the entire year we had been separated. He had painted a pathetic, helpless picture of me, telling them I was completely broke, unemployed, and desperate to get back into his good graces. He had convinced them that I was still living in the dangerous, rundown apartment complex I had been forced to rent right after he drained our joint accounts. He wanted to use my supposed desperation to publicly humiliate me while simultaneously securing a free, extravagant feast for his entire entourage. He truly believed I would be so intimidated by the presence of his mother and his fraternity brothers that I would hand over my last dime just to avoid a public scene. Jada immediately jumped into the silence. She shoved her phone forward, the blinding glare of her ring light hitting my eyes as she aggressively live-streamed the interaction to her followers. She had always fancied herself a social media star, constantly lecturing her audience about family loyalty while actively tearing down other women. "Look who decided to show up, guys," Jada taunted to her camera, panning the lens over my face to capture my reaction. The prodigal wife returns. Good thing my brother is such a forgiving Christian man, because taking back a baby mama, who cannot even afford her own rent, is true charity. She let out a high-pitched, grating laugh and turned the camera back to her brother. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply looked at Jada, then at Brenda, and finally at DeAndre. He stepped forward, bridging the distance between us, and wrapped a heavy, possessive arm around my shoulders. I stiffened, instantly repulsed by his touch, but his grip tightened, a silent physical warning for me to smile and play along. "Listen up, everyone!" DeAndre bellowed, projecting his voice to the far corners of the VIP room to ensure every single person heard him. "My beautiful wife is taking care of the tab tonight to prove she is ready to step up and be a real asset to this family. Let us give her a round of applause for finally doing the right thing." The fraternity brothers erupted into loud cheers, banging their heavy crystal glasses against the mahogany table. The church ladies clapped politely, whispering behind their hands about my lack of designer accessories. DeAndre looked down at me, his eyes cold and menacing beneath his wide, camera-ready smile. "You are paying right, baby," he muttered through gritted teeth, ensuring only I could hear the venom in his tone. "Show them you are not completely useless." I looked at the 30 expectant faces staring back at me. They were waiting for me to break under the immense social pressure. They were waiting for me to cry, to beg for mercy, to admit my absolute failure, and to hand over whatever meager funds they thought I possessed to cover their gluttony. Jada shoved her phone closer to my face, demanding a tearful reaction for her live audience. Right at that moment, the heavy oak doors swung open again. The restaurant manager walked in, accompanied by our sharply dressed waiter, who was carrying a sleek black leather folder. The room grew quiet with anticipation as the waiter approached the head of the table. He stood beside DeAndre, but extended the folder directly toward me, clearly following the instructions DeAndre had given him earlier in the evening. "The total is inside, ma'am," the waiter said with professional politeness. DeAndre quickly snatched the folder from the waiter's hand, opened it, and smirked. He did not even flinch at the astronomical number printed on the receipt. He simply slid the leather folder across the smooth table until it came to a halt right in front of me. The bold black ink at the bottom of the receipt clearly displayed a total of $6,450. DeAndre crossed his muscular arms over his chest, a look of absolute arrogant triumph settling onto his face. He nodded toward the bill, waiting for my submission. I stared at the staggering number printed on the crisp white receipt. $6,450. For a fraction of a second, the entire VIP room held its collective breath, eager to witness my humiliation. DeAndre stood tall, basking in the glow of his sister's live stream, utterly convinced that his psychological trap had worked flawlessly. He expected me to panic, to pull out a maxed-out credit card, or to beg him for help in front of his fraternity brothers and his mother's church friends. Instead, I did not cry, and I certainly did not argue. I calmly closed the leather folder, pushing it slightly away from me on the mahogany table. My face remained an unreadable mask of absolute composure. I completely ignored DeAndre, ignored Brenda's hateful glare, and walked straight over to the far corner of the room where my son was sitting. Trey looked up at me with wide, tired eyes, his little hands messy from his dinner. I gently unbuckled the straps of his high chair, pulled a wet wipe from my purse, and carefully cleaned his fingers and his mouth. I lifted my beautiful boy into my arms, resting his head against my shoulder. He let out a soft sigh, instantly comforted by my presence. Holding my son securely, I turned back to face the long banquet table. The silence in the room had shifted from expectant amusement to utter confusion. DeAndre frowned, his arms still crossed, clearly annoyed that I was not following his carefully constructed script. I made eye contact with the waiter who was still standing awkwardly near the head of the table, waiting for the payment to be processed. I raised my free hand and motioned for him to come closer. He stepped toward me, leaning down slightly to hear my voice over the low hum of nervous whispers that had started rippling through the room. I leaned in and whispered exactly 2 sentences, keeping my tone perfectly polite and strictly professional. I will only be paying for my son's bowl of tomato soup and my glass of tap water. Please close my tab right now and kindly ask the gentleman at the head of the table to provide his credit card for the rest of this party. The waiter blinked, his professional demeanor momentarily slipping as shock washed over his features. He looked at me, looked at the 30 empty lobster shells and champagne bottles, and then looked at DeAndre. Without missing a beat, the waiter pulled a small electronic payment terminal from his apron. I handed him my sleek metal corporate card. He quickly processed the transaction for $12, handed me my receipt, and nodded respectfully. Thank you for the excellent service, I said clearly, ensuring my voice carried just enough for the people closest to me to hear. I smoothly slipped my card back into my purse and adjusted my coat over my shoulders. DeAndre's arrogant smirk vanished entirely. His jaw dropped as he watched the waiter pivot away from me and walk directly toward him, holding out the black leather folder with the $6,000 bill inside. "Excuse me, sir," the waiter announced loudly, making no effort to lower his voice. "The lady has settled her individual tab for the children's soup. How would you like to handle the remaining $6,438 for your guests?" The atmosphere in the VIP room instantly plummeted from a joyous celebration to a suffocating, terrifying tension. The fraternity brothers stopped laughing, their eyes darting nervously toward the exit. The church ladies ceased their judgmental whispering and sat frozen in their seats, staring in horror at the massive bill. DeAndre's face contorted into a mask of pure panic. He let out a nervous, booming laugh, trying desperately to play off the moment as a hilarious misunderstanding. "Good one, Nia," he chuckled loudly, gesturing for me to come back. "Stop playing games and give the man your card. My fraternity brothers are watching. I am not playing any games, DeAndre." I replied, my voice steady and cold. "Enjoy your dinner." Sweat began to bead on DeAndre's forehead. The waiter remained standing firmly beside him, extending the bill folder closer. Realizing I was actually walking toward the door, DeAndre frantically reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black credit card, slapping it onto the waiter's tray with aggressive force. "Put it on this," DeAndre snapped, glaring at me with raw hatred. The waiter inserted the card into the handheld terminal. A few agonizing seconds passed in absolute silence. The machine let out a sharp negative beep. "I am sorry, sir, but this card has been declined," the waiter stated clearly. Brenda gasped loudly, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Jada's eyes went wide, and she fumbled with her ring light, suddenly desperate to turn off the live stream as the humiliation unfolded in real time before her thousands of followers. "Try this one," DeAndre hissed, yanking a silver card from his wallet and shoving it at the waiter. His hands were visibly shaking now. The waiter swiped the second card. Another sharp negative beep echoed through the silent room. "Declined again, sir." The waiter announced, his tone losing its polite warmth and taking on an edge of suspicion. "Do you have another form of payment?" The room erupted into frantic murmurs. The fraternity brothers suddenly found the ceiling fixtures incredibly interesting, entirely avoiding eye contact with their so-called wealthy provider. Brenda's church friends began whispering furiously to one another, their faces tight with embarrassment. The illusion of DeAndre's vast wealth and unbothered success shattered into a million irreparable pieces right before their eyes. DeAndre abandoned all pretense of cool confidence. He lunged away from the table, striding across the room and grabbing my upper arm with a bruising, forceful grip. His fingers dug into my skin as he pulled me away from the doorway, leaning down to hiss directly into my ear. "Do not embarrass me in front of the pastor and my brothers." DeAndre seethed, his breath hot and frantic against my cheek. "You know my credit is completely maxed out from the luxury car lease. Give the man your card right now before I make you regret this." I did not flinch. I turned my head, looking him dead in the eyes, and forcefully ripped my arm out of his grasp. "The luxury car lease you aggressively forced me to co-sign before I left you," I replied, my voice ringing out clearly for the entire room to hear. "The same car you have been driving around Atlanta, pretending you bought with your own cash. That is your problem now, DeAndre, not mine." Brenda let out a loud wail from the table, burying her face in her hands to hide from the stinging judgment of her peers. Jada was furiously tapping her phone screen, trying to delete the broadcast that had just humiliated her brother in front of the entire city. Before DeAndre could make another move toward me, the heavy oak doors swung open wide. The restaurant manager stepped into the room, flanked by two fully uniformed Atlanta police officers. The restaurant had clearly noticed the massive unpaid tab and the multiple declined cards, and they were not taking any chances with a party of 30 people trying to dine and dash. "Is there a problem with the payment, sir?" the manager asked sternly, crossing his arms as the police officers stepped into the room, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. DeAndre's eyes darted frantically between the police officers, the massive unpaid bill, and his terrified guests. The color completely drained from his face as he realized there was absolutely no escape from this trap. He was going to be arrested for theft of services right in front of the people he had tried to impress. Seeing that his public execution was inevitable, DeAndre turned his venom entirely on me. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, screaming over the murmurs of the room, "If you walk out that door and leave me here, I am taking full custody of Trey tomorrow morning." DeAndre roared, the veins in his neck bulging. "I will call my lawyer right now. You are a broke, jobless, unstable mother. A judge will never give a kid to a woman who cannot even keep a roof over her head. You are going to lose him forever." I adjusted Trey's weight on my hip, pulling his soft blanket up to shield him from the ugly shouting. I looked at the man who had spent years manipulating my reality, isolating me from my confidence, and attempting to strip away my dignity. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating pity for him. "Good luck with that, DeAndre," I said, softly delivering the final blow with devastating calm. I turned my back on the chaos, stepping smoothly past the restaurant manager and the two police officers. I walked out of the VIP room carrying my son down the hallway, completely ignoring the sound of Brenda's hysterical crying and DeAndre's furious shouting as the police officially detained him. I walked out the front doors of the restaurant and stepped into the cool, crisp Atlanta night air, breathing freely for the first time in a year. The morning sun streamed heavily through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my Buckhead penthouse, casting long, warm shadows across the imported hardwood floors. I stood in my expansive chef's kitchen, sipping a fresh cup of black coffee, watching my son Trey play quietly on a thick wool rug. He was stacking wooden blocks, completely oblivious to the absolute hurricane his father had unleashed the night before. For a few minutes, my world was a picture of absolute serenity. I had secured my peace, and I had successfully walked away from a highly orchestrated ambush without shedding a single tear. But that tranquil peace shattered the moment I glanced down at my kitchen island. My phone was vibrating so violently against the marble surface that it was slowly inching its way toward the edge. I set my coffee mug down and picked up the device. The screen was an absolute waterfall of digital chaos. Thousands of notifications were fighting for space on my lock screen. Missed calls, aggressive text messages, Instagram tags, and Twitter mentions flooded in faster than my eyes could track them. I tapped a message from a mutual acquaintance and quickly pieced together the aftermath of the steakhouse disaster. DeAndre and Brenda had not been able to talk or charm their way out of that $6,000 bill. The restaurant manager, unimpressed by DeAndre's leased designer suit and Brenda's church credentials, had officially pressed charges for theft of services. My estranged husband and his pious, judgmental mother had spent the entire night sitting shoulder to shoulder in a cold holding cell at the Atlanta Police Precinct. They were only released at dawn when Deacon Hayes, one of Brenda's most devoted and wealthy church enablers, drove down to personally post their bail. I unlocked my phone and opened the first social media link sent to my inbox. It directed me straight to TikTok. Jada had been incredibly busy while her family was behind bars. She had spent the entire night heavily editing the footage she captured at the restaurant, weaponizing her platform to destroy my character. The video was titled, "Toxic Baby Mama Abandons Family to Get Arrested." It already had 2 million views and the number was climbing by the second. I watched in cold, detached fascination as Jada's face filled the screen. She was sitting in the front seat of her car, her makeup perfectly smudged to simulate fresh, heartbreaking tears. "Guys, I am shaking right now," Jada sobbed directly into the camera lens, her voice quivering with expertly faked trauma. "We just wanted to have a peaceful, loving family dinner to welcome my brother's baby mama back into the fold. He is such a strong Black man, always trying to keep his family together and provide for his son. But she is just so bitter and broke." Jada wiped a non-existent tear from her cheek and continued her performance. She ordered thousands of dollars in food, threw a massive tantrum because she is jealous of his success, and then completely abandoned her own son's father to get him arrested. She is trying to tear down a successful man because she has nothing going for herself. The video then abruptly cut to heavily spliced footage from the VIP room. Jada had completely muted the audio of Brenda insulting my clothes and mocking my living situation. She had masterfully cut out the part where DeAndre loudly demanded I pay the bill to prove my worth. She had even cut out my polite whisper to the waiter. Instead, the video only showed me walking away coldly with Trey in my arms, immediately followed by a tight zoom on DeAndre fumbling with his declined credit cards. The editing made it look exactly as though I had intentionally ordered a massive feast, refused to pay out of pure spite, and then slipped out the door to maliciously stick him with the tab. The comments section was an absolute war zone of misogyny and misdirected anger. Thousands of strangers were tearing my character to shreds based on a 2-minute lie. They called me a gold digger who failed at digging. They called me a bitter, miserable stereotype. They praised DeAndre for trying so hard to co-parent with such a toxic, ungrateful woman. Jada had successfully weaponized her gullible audience, painting her brother as a wealthy, victimized martyr and me as a vindictive, jobless burden who belonged in the streets. But the public social media backlash was nothing compared to the private venom pouring directly into my phone. Brenda had clearly spent her morning mobilizing her inner circle. My text messages were a steady, terrifying stream of vitriol from women who claimed to walk in the light of the Lord. Sister Martha texted me at 7 in the morning. "You are a complete disgrace to this community, Naomi. Arresting the father of your child over a dinner bill. You are a poor excuse for a mother and a wicked, spiteful woman. God sees your dark heart and he will punish you for trying to ruin that boy." Sister Beatrice chimed in 10 minutes later. "Brenda wept in my arms this morning because of your cruelty. You tried to tear down a successful man because you cannot build anything yourself. Repent before you lose that precious boy to the system." Even DeAndre's fraternity brothers joined the digital assault. One sent a message calling me garbage and threatening to make sure I never found a job in Atlanta again. They invoked religion community standards and the concept of Black excellence, using their fake moral superiority as a bludgeon to defend a man who had actively tried to publicly humiliate the mother of his child. They did not know the truth, and they certainly did not care to ask. They worshipped the illusion of DeAndre's fake wealth and Brenda's carefully curated Sunday morning image. To them, I was just collateral damage, a convenient stepping stone for DeAndre's massive ego. I did not reply to a single text message. I did not leave a defensive comment on Jada's viral video. I simply took clear screenshots of every message, every threat, and every public lie, filing them away in a secure digital folder on my encrypted cloud drive. My phone vibrated violently again, but this time it was a secure incoming call. The caller ID flashed the name Desmond, my trusted family and corporate lawyer. I swiped to answer, placing the phone to my ear as I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling, sunlit Atlanta skyline. "Good morning, Naomi." Desmond's deep, steady voice came through the speaker. "I saw the absolute circus online this morning. Are you and Trey safe in the penthouse?" "We are perfectly fine, Desmond," I replied, my voice unwavering and completely devoid of panic. "Let them have their viral moment on the internet. It only gives us more leverage for the divorce settlement and the custody hearing." Desmond chuckled, the sound rich with professional satisfaction. "I have to admit, your restraint is incredible. Most clients would be screaming on Instagram Live by now. I just reviewed the corporate accounts. Nova Developments is completely secure. The final closing on the Midtown commercial property went through this morning while your husband was busy getting fingerprinted at the station." Hearing the name of my company grounded me instantly. For the past 12 months, while DeAndre was leasing luxury cars he could not afford and buying VIP sections at nightclubs to maintain his fake baller image, I had been working in absolute grinding silence. When we separated, he had intentionally drained our joint checking accounts, leaving me with almost nothing. He thought he had forced me into submission, expecting me to crawl back to him and beg for financial support. Instead, I had taken the meager personal savings I managed to hide and leveraged my background in software and analytics to aggressively pivot into commercial real estate development. I stayed completely off social media to protect my mental peace and my growing assets. I attended no parties. I bought no designer clothes. I lived like a ghost, pouring every ounce of my energy into my work and my son. That relentless quiet grind had birthed Nova Developments, a commercial real estate firm that now controlled over $5 million in liquid assets and highly profitable properties across the city. DeAndre thought I was drowning in debt in the dangerous, rundown neighborhood he had banished me to. He had absolutely no idea I was running a massive empire from a $3 million penthouse in the sky. He had spent the last year building a house of cards, while I had spent the last year building a fortress of bricks. "Has he filed any legal motions yet?" I asked Desmond, turning around to watch Trey happily knocking over a tower of wooden blocks. "Not yet," Desmond replied, the crisp shuffling of legal papers audible through the phone connection. "But given his massive public humiliation last night, we should expect a desperate, aggressive counterattack. Men like DeAndre do not handle embarrassment well. He is going to try to hit you where he thinks it hurts the most. Keep your phone close, Naomi. We are ready for whatever he throws at us." I thanked Desmond for his vigilance and ended the call feeling a powerful surge of calm, untouchable confidence. I had the money to fight him. I had the ruthless legal representation required to crush him. I had the unvarnished truth on my side. I walked over to the kitchen island to pour myself a second cup of coffee, feeling genuinely invincible. Then my phone screen lit up brightly with a single new text message. The sender was DeAndre. I opened the message fully expecting another string of pathetic insults, a demand for a public apology, or perhaps a threat to sue me for his legal fees. Instead, the words glaring back at me on the glowing screen made the blood freeze entirely in my veins. My breath caught in my throat as the reality of his desperation sank in. "CPS, and the police are on their way to your apartment right now. Since you want to play games and embarrass my family, I am taking my son. You are a homeless, jobless, unstable liability. You are done." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading DeAndre's vicious threat over and over again. "CPS, and the police are on their way to your apartment right now. Since you want to play games and embarrass my family, I am taking my son. You are a homeless, jobless, unstable liability. You are done. I did not panic. I did not rush to pack a bag, and I certainly did not scramble to hide my son. I simply smiled, locked my phone, and turned back to the massive marble island in my kitchen. DeAndre was deploying the ultimate weapon used by toxic abusers. He was attempting to weaponize the legal system and child protective services to terrorize me. But his entire offensive strategy was based on a reality that no longer existed. He was aiming a loaded gun at an absolute ghost. Across town on the decaying south side of Atlanta, DeAndre was stepping out of his leased Mercedes SUV. He slammed the door shut aggressively, adjusting his designer tie as he looked up at the crumbling four-story apartment complex. The Cypress Ridge apartments were notorious. The parking lot was littered with shattered glass, a rusted chain-link fence surrounded a long empty swimming pool, and half the exterior security lights were permanently burned out. This was exactly where DeAndre had forced me to live a year ago. He was not alone. Walking closely behind him was Ms. Higgins, an exhausted-looking social worker from Child Protective Services clutching a thick manila folder against her chest. Flanking his other side was his sister Jada, holding her phone up on a stabilized gimbal, actively recording every second of their arrival. Jada angled the camera to capture the peeling paint on the building's exterior. "You guys, look at this place," Jada whispered into her microphone, feigning absolute horror for her audience. "Look at where my brother's bitter ex-wife dragged my innocent little nephew. There are literally junkies sleeping in the stairwell. This is why you have to fight for your rights as a father. This environment is completely toxic." DeAndre turned to the social worker, his face arranged into a masterful mask of deep paternal agony. "I tried to help her, Ms. Higgins," DeAndre lied smoothly, placing a hand over his heart. "When we separated last year, I offered to keep her in our beautiful home, but she was so unstable. I had to withdraw my funds from our joint accounts just to protect my assets from her erratic spending. I told her she would not survive without my financial guidance. Instead of being reasonable, she took our son and ran to this dangerous slum out of pure spite. She is drowning in debt and putting my boy in imminent danger." Say. Ms. Higgins adjusted her glasses, looking nervously at a group of men loitering near the dumpsters. "If the living conditions inside the unit are as hazardous as you claim, Mr. Davis, we will take immediate protective action. But I need to assess the child physically first." DeAndre confidently led the way up the concrete stairs to the fourth floor. The air in the stairwell smelled heavily of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. He marched down the narrow, dimly lit hallway until he reached Unit 4B. The door was battered, covered in deep scratches from previous tenants. DeAndre did not bother knocking politely. He balled his hand into a tight fist and pounded aggressively against the cheap wood, the sound echoing loudly down the entire corridor. "Open this door right now, Naomi!" DeAndre bellowed, rattling the loose brass doorknob. "I know you are in there hiding. You cannot run from this. I brought CPS and I am taking my son out of this filthy trap. Open the door before I have the police break it down." He pounded again, harder this time, putting on a spectacular show of righteous fatherly anger for Jada's rolling camera and the social worker's notepad. He yelled about my supposed unemployment, screaming through the wood that I was a failure who had finally hit rock bottom. He was completely high on his own perceived power, absolutely certain that I was cowering on the other side of that door, trembling in fear. The aggressive pounding was so loud it echoed all the way down to the first floor. Within minutes, heavy footsteps pounded up the concrete stairs. Mr. Henderson, the gruff, no-nonsense property manager of Cypress Ridge, appeared at the end of the hallway. He was a large, intimidating man, holding a heavy ring of master keys, and he looked incredibly annoyed. "What is going on up here?" Mr. Henderson demanded, marching toward DeAndre. "You do not even live in this building, pal. Stop kicking my doors before I call the cops for trespassing." DeAndre puffed out his chest, stepping squarely into the landlord's path. "I am here to extract my son from an unfit mother," DeAndre stated arrogantly, pointing at Unit 4B. "My ex-wife is locked inside. She is unemployed, completely broke, and holding my child hostage in this slum. Open this door immediately so this social worker can do her job." Mr. Henderson looked at DeAndre, then looked at the social worker, and finally let out a harsh, barking laugh. He unclipped his heavy keyring from his belt. "Nobody is holding anyone hostage in there, buddy," Mr. Henderson said dryly. He pushed past DeAndre, shoved a master key into the deadbolt, and twisted it sharply. The door clicked and swung open, hitting the interior wall with a hollow thud. DeAndre surged forward, ready to corner me. Jada rushed right behind him, holding her camera high to capture my ultimate humiliation. They charged into the living room, only to freeze dead in their tracks. The apartment was completely empty. There was no furniture. There were no toys on the floor. There was no desperate crying mother. The walls were freshly painted in a sterile landlord white, and the cheap beige carpet had just been professionally steam cleaned. The air smelled strongly of ammonia and total vacancy. It was a perfectly clean, unrented unit. DeAndre spun around, his face pale with confusion. "Where is she?" he demanded, grabbing Mr. Henderson by the sleeve of his uniform shirt. "Where is my son? Did you kick her out? Did you throw her belongings in the dumpster?" Mr. Henderson yanked his arm away, glaring at DeAndre. "Nobody got kicked out. She broke her lease and moved out 3 entire months ago. Handed me the keys, paid the early termination penalty in crisp $100 bills, and drove off in a moving truck. I have not seen her since. Now get out of my clean unit before I charge you a cleaning fee for tracking mud on my carpet." DeAndre stumbled backward out of the apartment, his mind racing to process the landlord's words. He completely ignored the part about me paying the penalty in cash. His narcissistic brain could only process one logical conclusion. I had broken my lease because I was completely broke. I had abandoned the apartment because I was destitute. "She is homeless," DeAndre gasped, turning to the social worker with wide, frantic eyes. "Did you hear that? She could not afford the rent, so she ran. She is living on the streets with my 3-year-old son. She is probably sleeping in her car or bouncing between sketchy homeless shelters. You have to put out an Amber Alert." Ms. Higgins sighed heavily, closing her manila folder. "Mr. Davis, I cannot issue an alert just because your ex-wife changed her address without notifying you. Unless you have proof of the child's exact location and imminent physical danger, CPS cannot intervene. This is a family court matter now. You need to contact your attorney." DeAndre did exactly that. He stormed out of the apartment complex, ignoring Jada's frantic questions, and dialed his high-priced divorce lawyer. Pacing furiously across the glass-littered parking lot, DeAndre ordered his attorney to drop everything and immediately file an emergency ex parte motion for full legal and physical custody of Trey. He instructed his lawyer to cite extreme emergency circumstances, claiming the mother was a transient, unemployed flight risk who had abandoned her last known residence and was currently rendering a minor child homeless. He demanded the court strip me of all parental rights instantly. Because of the severe allegations of child endangerment and homelessness, the family court judge did not hesitate. The court granted an emergency mandatory custody hearing for 9 o'clock the very next morning. Back in my sunlit Buckhead penthouse, my phone chimed softly. It was an official email from the Fulton County Family Court, accompanied by a vicious text from DeAndre. "Emergency custody hearing tomorrow morning at 9. Bring my son to the courthouse. Since you want to play games and live on the streets, I am taking him permanently. You are homeless, you are broke, and you are finished." The heavy mahogany doors of the Fulton County Family Court closed behind me with a definitive echoing thud. I walked down the center aisle with my head held high, my posture projecting absolute unshakable calm. I was dressed in a sharply tailored midnight blue pantsuit, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy radiating from the other side of the room. Desmond walked smoothly beside me, his expression an unreadable mask of professional detachment, carrying nothing but a single, incredibly slim leather briefcase. Across the aisle, the circus was already in full swing. DeAndre was seated at the petitioner's table, leaning back in his chair with a posture that screamed unwarranted arrogance. He was wearing a blindingly bright, custom-tailored burgundy suit, an aggressive fashion choice clearly meant to project immense wealth and unbothered power. His expensive gold watch caught the harsh fluorescent light every time he adjusted his cuffs, a calculated move to ensure the judge noticed his supposed financial superiority. He flashed me a smug, predatory smirk as I took my seat, utterly convinced that he had me completely cornered. Behind him in the gallery sat his mother, Brenda. She had worn her absolute best Sunday church attire, complete with an oversized, violently purple hat that seemed to take up an entire row of seating. She was clutching a massive leather-bound Bible tightly to her chest, rocking back and forth slightly, as if she were deep in fervent prayer. She was actively projecting an aura of unimpeachable moral superiority to anyone who glanced in her direction. Jada was sitting right next to her, glaring daggers at me, while aggressively tapping away on her smartphone. She was undoubtedly updating her massive follower base about her brother's heroic, heartbreaking legal battle to save his innocent son from a deranged mother. Judge Harrison, a stern, imposing woman with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, slammed her gavel to call the emergency hearing to order. She looked down at the paperwork in front of her, her expression tightening as she read the severe allegations. DeAndre's attorney, a loud, aggressively theatrical man named Mr. Sterling, immediately leaped to his feet to launch his opening statement. He paced heavily in front of the judge's bench, waving his hands wildly in the air as he began painting a horrific, entirely fabricated picture of my life over the past 12 months. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling boomed, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. We are here today because a young, innocent child is in imminent, life-threatening danger. The respondent, Nia Davis, is a deeply unstable, vindictive woman who has completely lost her grip on reality and her ability to function in society. When my client, a respectable and highly successful businessman, attempted to extend an olive branch by hosting a peaceful reconciliation dinner, the respondent orchestrated a malicious public scene to humiliate him. Mr. Sterling paused dramatically, turning to glare at me before pulling out his tablet. He formally requested to submit Jada's viral TikTok video into the official court record. Judge Harrison granted the request, and the heavily edited, highly manipulative footage played on the courtroom monitors. The sound of Jada's fake, quivering sobs filled the silent room, followed by the spliced clips that made it appear as though I had ordered a massive feast, refused to pay out of pure spite, and abandoned DeAndre to face arrest. As you can see, Your Honor, Mr. Sterling continued, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. This is not the behavior of a rational mother. Her refusal to pay that bill was not a choice. It was a desperate symptom of her absolute grinding poverty. She is entirely destitute, but her financial ruin is only the beginning of this tragedy. Mr. Sterling marched back to his table and snatched up a thick stack of papers. He dramatically slapped an affidavit onto the judge's desk. He announced that it was a sworn statement from the landlord of the Cypress Ridge Apartments, the dangerous rundown complex where DeAndre had banished me a year ago. This affidavit is undeniable proof of the respondent's destitution, Mr. Sterling declared triumphantly. My client, sick with worry for his son's welfare, went to this apartment yesterday, accompanied by a social worker. Do you know what they found? Your Honor, nothing. The apartment was completely empty. The respondent broke her lease and fled in the dead of night 3 months ago because she was drowning in debt and completely incapable of maintaining basic shelter. He pointed an accusing finger directly at my face. She has been living on the streets or bouncing between dangerous, unsanitary homeless shelters for a quarter of the year, dragging a 3-year-old child through absolute squalor. She is a transient, unemployed flight risk, and if this court does not grant my client full, immediate custody today, we may never see that little boy again. DeAndre nodded solemnly, along with his lawyer's passionate performance, putting a hand over his face to simulate deep fatherly agony. Judge Harrison's brow furrowed as she reviewed the landlord's affidavit, the severe implications of homelessness, clearly catching her full attention. But Mr. Sterling was not finished building his towering monument of lies. He called Brenda to the witness stand. Brenda practically glided up to the witness box, placing her hand on the Bible with exaggerated theatrical reverence before taking her seat. The absolute moment she sat down, the fake tears began to flow. She wept openly, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief as she testified under the strict penalty of perjury. She is a lost soul. Your Honor, Brenda sobbed into the microphone, her voice shaking with fake devastation. I have prayed for Nia every single day, but she has strayed so far from the Lord's path. My son DeAndre tried everything to save their marriage. He tried to provide a stable Christian home that represented true Black excellence. He gave her everything a woman could ever want, but she was too rebellious, too broken, and too jealous of his massive success to accept his leadership. Brenda paused, looking up at the judge with wide, pleading eyes. She took my grandson into the slums. Your Honor, she isolated him from our wealthy, loving family because of her bitter pride. And now she has him sleeping on the streets. Please, I am begging you as a grandmother, place that precious boy in our home before her toxic failures ruin his life forever. Through this entire agonizingly long performance, I did not move a single muscle. I sat perfectly still beside Desmond, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my breathing slow and completely controlled. I did not interrupt Mr. Sterling's vicious character assassination. I did not roll my eyes at DeAndre's smug, arrogant smirks across the aisle. I did not yell out in protest when Brenda blatantly lied to the judge under oath, weaponizing her fake religion to steal my child. I simply let them exhaust themselves. I let them talk and talk and talk. I let them build a massive, inescapable tower of perjury right in the middle of a federal courtroom. DeAndre had spent the entire year constructing a fake reality where I was a helpless victim, and he had stupidly believed his own delusion. He truly thought I was sitting in this courtroom, terrified, praying for mercy, completely defenseless against his high-priced lawyer and his viral social media smear campaign. He did not realize that silence is not always a sign of weakness. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of a trap snapping completely shut. Finally, Mr. Sterling rested his case, buttoning his suit jacket and returning to his seat, looking incredibly pleased with his fabricated destruction of my entire character. The courtroom fell into a tense, suffocating silence. DeAndre shot me one last victorious look, entirely convinced that the judge was about to hand him the custody papers right then and there. Judge Harrison slowly folded her hands on her desk and turned her stern, penetrating gaze directly toward my table. The weight of her judicial authority bore down on the room. Ms. Nia, the judge said, her voice sharp and echoing loudly in the quiet courtroom. The petitioner has made incredibly severe allegations today. He claims you are currently homeless, entirely unemployed, and dragging a minor child through dangerous transient living conditions. Before I make any temporary rulings regarding the safety of this child, I need a direct answer from you. Where exactly did you and the child sleep last night? DeAndre leaned forward, practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting to hear me admit my utter defeat. Brenda clutched her Bible tighter, her fake tears drying up instantly as she prepared to witness my absolute destruction. Desmond stood up smoothly, adjusting his tie. He did not look at DeAndre. He did not look at Mr. Sterling. He looked directly at the judge, a faint, devastatingly calm smile touching the corners of his mouth. He reached down and snapped open the golden clasps of his sleek leather briefcase. With agonizing precision, Desmond extracted a thick, heavily bound stack of documents from the velvet-lined interior of his briefcase. The crisp, sharp rustle of the heavy linen paper seemed incredibly loud in the dead silent courtroom. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice to match the theatrical booming cadence Mr. Sterling had just used. Instead, Desmond projected an aura of absolute, terrifying legal certainty. He handed the primary stack to the court bailiff, who immediately carried it up to the wooden bench, and then he slid a duplicate copy across the aisle, leaving it resting right in front of DeAndre's suddenly rigid hands. Your Honor. Desmond began, his voice smooth, resonant, and effortlessly commanding. The petitioner has just spent the better part of an hour spinning a highly entertaining, completely fabricated fairy tale for this court. He has weaponized the emergency legal system based on assumptions, malicious intent, and a profound ignorance of my client's actual reality. My client, Miss Nia Davis, is not homeless. She is not unemployed. She is certainly not dragging her son through dangerous transient living conditions. Desmond gestured toward the paperwork now resting in front of the judge. If you review the first exhibit, Your Honor, you will find a certified county-stamped property deed. For the past 3 months, my client and her minor child have been residing in a $3 million luxury penthouse located in the heart of Buckhead. That property is fully secured, fully staffed with a 24-hour concierge and private security, and it is owned free and clear, purchased entirely in cash by her corporate holding company. The atmosphere in the courtroom shattered instantly. The shift in energy was so violent and immediate that it felt like all the oxygen had been forcibly sucked out of the room through the ventilation vents. DeAndre's jaw practically unhinged. The smug, arrogant smirk that had been plastered across his face all morning completely vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at Desmond, his eyes wide and unblinking, before his head snapped down to look at the paperwork resting on the table in front of him. His hands began to tremble slightly as he reached out to flip open the first page. Behind him in the gallery, the carefully constructed facade of the Davis family crumbled in spectacular fashion. A heavy, resounding thud echoed through the room. Brenda had gone completely slack-jawed, her hands losing their grip in her shock, causing her massive leather-bound Bible to slip from her fingers and hit the wooden floorboards. The manufactured pious tears instantly dried up on her cheeks. She stared at my back as if I had suddenly grown a second head, her mouth hanging open in a comical display of absolute disbelief. Beside her, Jada froze. Her thumbs stopped aggressively tapping the screen of her smartphone. The frantic real-time social media updates documenting her brother's tragic battle for custody ceased entirely. She slowly lowered the phone to her lap, her eyes darting between my perfectly tailored suit and the imposing stack of financial documents resting on the judge's bench. The viral narrative she had spent all night building on TikTok was collapsing right before her eyes, completely obliterated by undeniable certified legal truth. Mr. Sterling. DeAndre's loud theatrical lawyer suddenly looked distinctly nauseous. He frantically pulled the duplicate stack of papers toward him, his eyes rapidly scanning the top pages. The color drained from his face as he flipped past the property deed and landed on the corporate bank statements. He swallowed hard, nervously adjusting his collar, realizing instantly that he had just aggressively presented a perjured case to one of the most notoriously strict judges in Fulton County. Judge Harrison did not speak immediately. She adjusted her reading glasses, pulling the thick stack of documents closer to her. For several agonizingly long minutes, the only sound in the entire courtroom was the deliberate, rhythmic turning of pages as the judge meticulously reviewed the financial disclosure. I sat perfectly still beside Desmond, my hands resting lightly in my lap, feeling a profound, radiant warmth spreading through my chest. I had endured a year of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and public humiliation, all culminating in this exact moment of total vindication. When Judge Harrison finally looked up, her expression was terrifying. The stern neutrality she had maintained throughout the hearing had been replaced by a cold, searing fury directed entirely at the petitioner's table. "Mr. Davis," Judge Harrison said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low, sharp register, "I am looking at certified corporate filings and authenticated bank statements. According to these records, the respondent is the sole owner and chief executive officer of Nova Developments, a highly successful commercial real estate firm. Furthermore, these verified financial disclosures confirm that Ms. Davis currently holds over $5 million in liquid assets across several corporate and personal accounts, completely separate from the fully paid-off Buckhead penthouse." The judge paused, letting those astronomical numbers hang heavily in the silent air. $5 million, $3 million in real estate. The words seemed to physically strike DeAndre. He slumped back in his chair, the expensive, custom-tailored burgundy suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume on a defeated man. His breathing became shallow and rapid as the vast, insurmountable gulf between his fake-leased lifestyle and my actual quietly built wealth became undeniably clear. "You came into my courtroom today," Judge Harrison continued, her voice rising with righteous judicial anger, "and you demanded an emergency ex parte hearing. You circumvented standard legal procedures by claiming that this child was in imminent life-threatening danger due to the mother's absolute destitution. You presented an empty apartment as proof of homelessness, ignoring the very basic, easily verifiable fact that she had simply moved to a significantly safer, vastly more expensive residence. Mr. Sterling jumped to his feet, holding his hands up in a desperate gesture of surrender. Your Honor, my client was genuinely unaware of the respondent's current financial status. He acted out of an abundance of caution for his son. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge Harrison snapped, slamming her hand flat against the wooden desk. You do not get to weaponize the Child Protective Services system and the emergency docket of this court because your client failed to communicate with his estranged wife. You brought a witness to this stand who wept under oath about squalor and poverty, while the child in question is currently living in a secure multi-million-dollar property with a mother who possesses more liquid capital than most mid-sized corporations. The judge picked up DeAndre's emergency motion paperwork and held it up in the air before throwing it back down onto her desk with absolute disgust. This entire proceeding is a malicious, frivolous waste of judicial resources, Judge Harrison declared, her eyes locked onto DeAndre, who was now visibly shrinking under her furious gaze. You attempted to use this court to harass, intimidate, and punish the mother of your child. I am dismissing this emergency custody claim immediately with prejudice. The child will remain in the primary physical custody of the mother, exactly where he belongs. Furthermore, I am holding the petitioner fully responsible for all legal fees incurred by the respondent for having to defend herself against this baseless fabricated emergency. She picked up her heavy wooden gavel. If you ever attempt to use this court to play your personal vindictive games again, Mr. Davis, I will hold you in contempt and heavily sanction you. This hearing is adjourned. The loud, sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the room like a gunshot, signaling the absolute and total collapse of DeAndre's malicious trap. I stood up smoothly, buttoning my suit jacket. Desmond offered me a brief professional nod of satisfaction before snapping his briefcase shut. We did not celebrate. We did not gloat. We simply turned and walked together down the center aisle of the courtroom, our footsteps echoing steadily against the polished floorboards. As we passed the gallery, I did not even spare a glance at Brenda or Jada. I could feel their stunned, humiliated stares burning into the side of my face, but they no longer mattered. They were ghosts fading rapidly into the rear-view mirror of my life. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the bright, echoing marble hallway of the courthouse, taking a deep, cleansing breath. But the silence did not last. Heavy, frantic footsteps slapped against the marble floor behind us. DeAndre burst through the courtroom doors, his face flushed a dark, angry red. The shock and humiliation that had paralyzed him in front of the judge had completely burned away, rapidly replaced by a ravenous, desperate hunger. The illusion of the concerned, protective father was gone entirely. He did not care about Trey's safety, and he never had. The only thing his narcissistic mind had registered during the judge's brutal dressing down were the massive multi-million-dollar figures read aloud for the court record. "Naomi, wait!" DeAndre shouted, his voice echoing loudly down the corridor as he sprinted to catch up with us. I stopped and turned slowly, my expression completely blank, as Desmond stepped slightly in front of me, establishing a firm, protective physical boundary. DeAndre ignored the lawyer completely, invading my personal space, his chest heaving as he stared at me with wide, crazed, calculating eyes. "A $3 million penthouse!" DeAndre sneered, his voice dropping into a greedy, menacing hiss. $5 million sitting in liquid bank accounts. You really thought you could hide all of that from me? You thought you could just quietly build a massive empire while we were still legally married? He stepped closer, blocking my path to the elevators, a sick, victorious smile stretching across his face. He thought he had lost the custody battle, but he believed he had just won the financial war. "That is marital property, sweetheart," DeAndre declared, pointing a thick, aggressive finger directly at my chest. Every single dime of that money, every single brick of that penthouse, and every single corporate asset you built while carrying my last name belongs to us. My lawyer is filing a motion for 50% of everything you own by the close of business today. You are going to cut me a check for $4 million, or I am going to tear your little company apart piece by piece. The heavy mahogany doors of the Fulton County Family Court closed behind me with a definitive echoing thud. I walked down the center aisle with my head held high, my posture projecting absolute, unshakable calm. I was dressed in a sharply tailored midnight blue pantsuit, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy radiating from the other side of the room. Desmond walked smoothly beside me, his expression an unreadable mask of professional detachment, carrying nothing but a single incredibly slim leather briefcase. Across the aisle, the circus was already in full swing. DeAndre was seated at the petitioner's table, leaning back in his chair with a posture that screamed unwarranted arrogance. He was wearing a blindingly bright, custom-tailored burgundy suit, an aggressive fashion choice clearly meant to project immense wealth and unbothered power. His expensive gold watch caught the harsh fluorescent light every time he adjusted his cuffs, a calculated move to ensure the judge noticed his supposed financial superiority. He flashed me a smug, predatory smirk as I took my seat, utterly convinced that he had me completely cornered. Behind him in the gallery sat his mother, Brenda. She had worn her absolute best Sunday church attire, complete with an oversized, violently purple hat that seemed to take up an entire row of seating. She was clutching a massive leather-bound Bible tightly to her chest, rocking back and forth slightly, as if she were deep in fervent prayer. She was actively projecting an aura of unimpeachable moral superiority to anyone who glanced in her direction. Jada was sitting right next to her, glaring daggers at me while aggressively tapping away on her smartphone. She was undoubtedly updating her massive follower base about her brother's heroic, heartbreaking legal battle to save his innocent son from a deranged mother. Judge Harrison, a stern, imposing woman with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, slammed her gavel to call the emergency hearing to order. She looked down at the paperwork in front of her, her expression tightening as she read the severe allegations. DeAndre's attorney, a loud, aggressively theatrical man named Mr. Sterling, immediately leaped to his feet to launch his opening statement. He paced heavily in front of the judge's bench, waving his hands wildly in the air as he began painting a horrific, entirely fabricated picture of my life over the past 12 months. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling boomed, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. We are here today because a young, innocent child is in imminent, life-threatening danger. The respondent, Nia Davis, is a deeply unstable, vindictive woman who has completely lost her grip on reality and her ability to function in society. When my client, a respectable and highly successful businessman, attempted to extend an olive branch by hosting a peaceful reconciliation dinner, the respondent orchestrated a malicious public scene to humiliate him. Mr. Sterling paused dramatically, turning to glare at me before pulling out his tablet. He formally requested to submit Jada's viral TikTok video into the official court record. Judge Harrison granted the request, and the heavily edited, highly manipulative footage played on the courtroom monitors. The sound of Jada's fake, quivering sobs filled the silent room, followed by the spliced clips that made it appear as though I had ordered a massive feast, refused to pay out of pure spite, and abandoned DeAndre to face arrest. As you can see, Your Honor, Mr. Sterling continued, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. This is not the behavior of a rational mother. Her refusal to pay that bill was not a choice. It was a desperate symptom of her absolute grinding poverty. She is entirely destitute. But her financial ruin is only the beginning of this tragedy. Mr. Sterling marched back to his table and snatched up a thick stack of papers. He dramatically slapped an affidavit onto the judge's desk. He announced that it was a sworn statement from the landlord of the Cypress Ridge Apartments, the dangerous rundown complex where DeAndre had banished me a year ago. This affidavit is undeniable proof of the respondent's destitution, Mr. Sterling declared triumphantly. My client, sick with worry for his son's welfare, went to this apartment yesterday accompanied by a social worker. Do you know what they found, Your Honor? Nothing. The apartment was completely empty. The respondent broke her lease and fled in the dead of night 3 months ago because she was drowning in debt and completely incapable of maintaining basic shelter. He pointed an accusing finger directly at my face. She has been living on the streets or bouncing between dangerous, unsanitary homeless shelters for a quarter of the year, dragging a 3-year-old child through absolute squalor. She is a transient, unemployed flight risk. And if this court does not grant my client full immediate custody today, we may never see that little boy again. DeAndre nodded solemnly along with his lawyer's passionate performance, putting a hand over his face to simulate deep fatherly agony. Judge Harrison's brow furrowed as she reviewed the landlord's affidavit, the severe implications of homelessness clearly catching her full attention. But Mr. Sterling was not finished building his towering monument of lies. He called Brenda to the witness stand. Brenda practically glided up to the witness box, placing her hand on the Bible, with exaggerated theatrical reverence before taking her seat. The absolute moment she sat down, the fake tears began to flow. She wept openly, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief as she testified under the strict penalty of perjury. "She is a lost soul, Your Honor." Brenda sobbed into the microphone, her voice shaking with fake devastation. "I have prayed for Nia every single day, but she has strayed so far from the Lord's path. My son DeAndre tried everything to save their marriage. He tried to provide a stable Christian home that represented true Black excellence. He gave her everything a woman could ever want, but she was too rebellious, too broken, and too jealous of his massive success to accept his leadership." Brenda paused, looking up at the judge with wide, pleading eyes. "She took my grandson into the slums, Your Honor. She isolated him from our wealthy, loving family because of her bitter pride, and now she has him sleeping on the streets. Please, I am begging you as a grandmother, place that precious boy in our home before her toxic failures ruin his life forever." Through this entire agonizingly long performance, I did not move a single muscle. I sat perfectly still beside Desmond, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my breathing slow and completely controlled. I did not interrupt Mr. Sterling's vicious character assassination. I did not roll my eyes at DeAndre's smug, arrogant smirks across the aisle. I did not yell out in protest when Brenda blatantly lied to the judge under oath, weaponizing her fake religion to steal my child. I simply let them exhaust themselves. I let them talk and talk and talk. I let them build a massive, inescapable tower of perjury right in the middle of a federal courtroom. DeAndre had spent the entire year constructing a fake reality where I was a helpless victim, and he had stupidly believed his own delusion. He truly thought I was sitting in this courtroom terrified, praying for mercy, completely defenseless against his high-priced lawyer and his viral social media smear campaign. He did not realize that silence is not always a sign of weakness. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of a trap snapping completely shut. Finally, Mr. Sterling rested his case, buttoning his suit jacket, and returning to his seat looking incredibly pleased with his fabricated destruction of my entire character. The courtroom fell into a tense, suffocating silence. DeAndre shot me one last victorious look, entirely convinced that the judge was about to hand him the custody papers right then and there. Judge Harrison slowly folded her hands on her desk and turned her stern, penetrating gaze directly toward my table. The weight of her judicial authority bore down on the room. "Miss Nia," the judge said, her voice sharp and echoing loudly in the quiet courtroom. "The petitioner has made incredibly severe allegations today. He claims you are currently homeless, entirely unemployed, and dragging a minor child through dangerous transient living conditions. Before I make any temporary rulings regarding the safety of this child, I need a direct answer from you. Where exactly did you and the child sleep last night?" Desmond stands up, opening a sleek leather briefcase. "You think you outsmarted me? I know who your silent 30% investor is." DeAndre stepped forward, completely ignoring Desmond's rigid protective stance. The overpowering scent of his expensive cologne filled the narrow courthouse corridor, a sharp metallic odor that suddenly made my stomach turn. He leaned in so close I could see the furious, triumphant pulse of the vein at his temple. "Did you honestly believe you could build a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate empire in Atlanta without me finding out?" DeAndre sneered, his voice dropping into a raspy, malicious whisper. "I have connections in this city, Nia. Real connections. You thought you were so incredibly clever securing your seed money through a blind corporate trust. Vance Equity Partners. It sounds highly professional, totally anonymous, but you should have dug a little deeper into the corporate filings before you signed away nearly a third of your company. I kept my face perfectly neutral, but a sudden icy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. Vance Equity Partners had provided the crucial $2 million capital injection I needed to acquire my first major commercial lot. The firm was represented by a proxy lawyer. I had never met the principal investor face to face. Tyrell Vance DeAndre stated, rolling the name around in his mouth like a piece of rich candy. The ruthless, highly successful construction magnate. He is also my estranged cousin. We had a falling out 5 years ago over a real estate deal, which is exactly why he hides his assets behind holding companies. He loves keeping his hands clean while he buys up the city. But blood is thicker than water, sweetheart, especially when there are millions of dollars on the line. Desmond stepped squarely between us, his posture radiating absolute legal authority. Whatever ridiculous conspiracy you are attempting to spin, Mr. Davis, it has zero bearing on the finalized separation agreement. Ms. Davis owns her 70% majority stake free and clear. You have no legal avenue to touch those assets. DeAndre threw his head back and let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed against the marble walls. I do not need to touch her assets, he replied, pointing a finger at Desmond. I am going to take the entire company right out from under her. You see, I reached out to Tyrell the moment my private investigator linked Vance Equity to Nova Developments. Tyrell does not care about you, Nia. He does not care about your visionary commercial projects or your inspirational rise from the ashes. He cares about cold, hard cash. And I just offered him the most lucrative deal of his entire miserable life. DeAndre paced in a tight circle, his burgundy suit flashing under the fluorescent lights as he laid out his extortion plan with gleeful, terrifying precision. Tyrell holds 30% of your voting rights. DeAndre explained, his eyes wide and manic. According to your own corporate bylaws, a minority shareholder can call an emergency board meeting to demand a vote of no confidence if they suspect the chief executive officer is engaging in erratic, unstable behavior that threatens the financial integrity of the firm. Like, for instance, a CEO who is currently embroiled in a messy, highly public, and extremely volatile custody battle. He stepped back into my personal space. I promised Tyrell a massive, undeniable kickback if he initiates that vote of no confidence to officially remove you as CEO and uses his leverage to install me as the acting corporate director. I will guarantee Vance Construction the exclusive unbid contracts for every single future development project Nova initiates over the next 10 years. Plus, I promise to authorize a massive cash dividend payout from your liquid reserves the absolute second I take control of the accounts. Desmond's expression hardened. That is blatant corporate extortion and a direct violation of fiduciary duty. You are openly admitting to a conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Prove it, DeAndre challenged, spreading his arms wide. It is my word against yours in an empty hallway. Tyrell is a shark. He will stand up in that boardroom and claim he is acting purely to protect his financial investment from an unstable leader. You have exactly 24 hours, Nia. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapping the screen aggressively. You have 24 hours to step down voluntarily. You will hand over the CEO title, sign over total control of the company accounts to me, and walk away quietly. If you fight me, if you try to hold on to your little empire, Tyrell will call that board meeting tomorrow morning. We will force you out publicly. We will drag your name through the mud in the Atlanta Business Chronicle. We will paint you as a fraudulent, emotionally unhinged liability. Your corporate reputation will be completely destroyed, and no bank in this city will ever lend you another dime. Your empire is mine either way. Choose how painful you want the extraction to be. DeAndre spun on his heel and marched down the hallway, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing loudly as he disappeared into the elevator bay. I stood frozen in the corridor, the chill of the marble floor seeping through the soles of my shoes. Desmond touched my shoulder gently, his voice low and intensely focused. Do not let him rattle you. He is playing a desperate game of intimidation. We will file an emergency injunction to block any board actions. I will have my team look into Tyrell Vance immediately. No, I said, my voice eerily calm, surprising even myself. Do not file the injunction. Let him call the meeting. Desmond frowned, clearly confused by my lack of panic. Nia, if Tyrell has the voting rights, DeAndre claims a hostile takeover attempt is a very real, very dangerous possibility. I know, I replied, turning to walk toward the exit. But DeAndre made one massive fatal miscalculation today. He assumes I have been operating in the dark. The drive from the downtown courthouse to the Buckhead Financial District was a blur of shifting traffic and pouring rain. I sat in the back of my private car, watching the towering glass and steel skyscrapers pass by, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of clarity. DeAndre thought he was the ultimate predator, the master manipulator who could pull strings in the shadows and watch me dance. He had spent our entire marriage convincing me that I was stupid, capable only of following his directions. He had no idea the kind of woman he had created in his absence. The private elevator opened directly into my penthouse. The space was a massive, sweeping expanse of white marble, brushed steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the entire city. The afternoon light filtered through the rain-streaked glass, casting long, elegant shadows across the pristine hardwood floors. I walked quietly down the main hallway, pausing at the open doorway of Trey's bedroom. My son was fast asleep, his small chest rising and falling in a slow, peaceful rhythm. He was clutching a small stuffed bear, completely oblivious to the vicious high-stakes war being waged over his future. Looking at his innocent face, a fierce, undeniable protective instinct surged through my veins. This was not just about commercial real estate or corporate bank accounts. This was about generational wealth. This was about building an impenetrable fortress that would guarantee my son would never, ever have to rely on a manipulative, narcissistic man for his survival. DeAndre wanted to take the very foundation of my son's future and hand it over to a corrupt construction magnate just to satisfy his own bruised ego. I quietly pulled the bedroom door shut and walked directly into my home office. I bypassed the sleek, minimalist desk and went straight to the secure wall safe, hidden behind a contemporary art print. I spun the dial, pulled out a thick, heavily encrypted laptop, and sat down at the glass conference table in the center of the room. I did not waste time crying. I did not panic. I opened the laptop, disabled the security firewall, and initiated a secure encrypted video call. The screen blinked, and the sharp, focused face of Marcus appeared. Marcus was a highly specialized, ruthlessly efficient forensic accountant I had quietly hired on retainer 8 months ago. I had brought him on board the absolute moment I noticed strange microscopic discrepancies in the billing invoices submitted by Vance Equity Partners regarding our preliminary development surveys. "Good afternoon, Nia," Marcus said, his voice crisp and professional. "I assume from the emergency secure line that the situation has officially escalated." "DeAndre just played his hand at the courthouse," I replied, staring directly into the camera. "He admitted to a coordinated conspiracy with Tyrell Vance. He plans to initiate a hostile takeover tomorrow morning via a vote of no confidence. He promised Tyrell exclusive construction contracts and a massive cash payout from the Nova Development Reserve accounts." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He actually admitted the kickback scheme out loud. "Yes," I confirmed. "He is entirely confident that there is no paper trail connecting him to Tyrell's voting rights." "Well, your ex-husband is a spectacular fool," Marcus stated, pulling up a highly detailed spreadsheet on his shared screen. "Because I have spent the last 8 months mapping every single digital footprint Tyrell Vance has ever made. You were right to be suspicious of those early invoices. Tyrell has not just been funneling money through holding companies. He has been actively engaging in massive systemic corporate embezzlement. I have officially successfully traced the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I have the wire transfer receipts proving he has been defrauding his other investors to cover his massive gambling debts." Marcus hit a few keys, bringing up a separate newly populated document. "But here is the absolute best part, Nia. DeAndre is not as smart as he thinks he is. In his rush to secure Tyrell's loyalty, DeAndre transferred a $50,000 good faith deposit into one of Tyrell's shell accounts exactly 48 hours ago. DeAndre used a corporate account tied directly to his own business. I have the routing numbers, I have the timestamps, I have undeniable federal-level proof of attempted corporate bribery and conspiracy to commit fraud. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, feeling the final heavy puzzle piece lock perfectly into place. DeAndre had aimed a loaded weapon directly at my head, but he had handed me the detonator to his own absolute destruction. Compile everything into a single comprehensive digital dossier, I instructed Marcus, my voice sharp and decisive. I want the wire transfers, the offshore account routing numbers, the forged invoices, and the proof of DeAndre's bribe formatted and ready for immediate presentation. Send the encrypted file to my private server by midnight. Consider it done, Marcus replied before cutting the connection. I closed the laptop and picked up my cell phone. I dialed the number for Sarah, my executive assistant, who was still working at the Nova Development's corporate headquarters downtown. She answered on the first ring. Good afternoon, Ms. Davis. How did the hearing go? The hearing went exactly as expected, Sarah, I said smoothly, turning my chair to look out at the sprawling, rain-soaked city skyline. But we have a sudden, urgent change of schedule for tomorrow morning. I need you to completely clear my calendar for the first half of the day. Understood, Sarah replied, the sound of her rapid typing echoing through the phone. Should I reschedule the architectural review meeting? Cancel everything, I instructed. Then I need you to go into the main executive boardroom. Ensure the heavy privacy blinds are fully drawn and secure the room. We are expecting unexpected guests tomorrow at 9 in the morning. Guests, Ms. Davis. Should I prepare guest passes for security? No, I replied, a cold, unyielding determination settling deeply into my bones. Security will let them up. DeAndre Davis and Tyrell Vance are going to attempt a hostile corporate takeover of my company tomorrow morning. Let them come. Prepare the projector. The morning sun broke over the Atlanta skyline, casting long, sharp beams of light across the polished glass and steel of the Nova Development's corporate headquarters. I had arrived 3 hours early, making sure every single detail was perfectly arranged. The atmosphere on the executive floor was usually one of quiet, focused productivity, a steady hum of billion-dollar deals being meticulously crafted. Today, however, the air felt highly charged, thick with the electric anticipation of a looming execution. At precisely 9 o'clock, the private executive elevators chimed with a soft, melodic ring. The heavy brushed metal door slid open, and the circus officially arrived on my floor. DeAndre stepped out first, walking with a wide, aggressive swagger. He was wearing an immaculate navy blue pinstripe suit, a fresh haircut, and an expression of pure, unadulterated greed. He looked around the expansive high-end reception area, his eyes hungrily taking in the imported Italian marble floors, the custom modern art installations, and the frosted glass walls bearing the company logo. He was acting exactly as though he already owned the entire building. Flanking his right side was his cousin, Tyrell Vance. Tyrell was a hulking, physically intimidating man in a tight suit that strained across his broad shoulders. He surveyed my pristine lobby with the cold, calculating eyes of a vulture about to feast on a fresh carcass. Trailing closely behind them were Brenda and Jada, both dressed as if they were attending a highly publicized red carpet event rather than a corporate boardroom meeting. Jada held a stabilized camera gimbal high in the air, her face brightly illuminated by the harsh ring light attached to her phone. She was actively live-streaming the entire invasion to her rabid, drama-hungry audience. Hey guys, we are here live at Nova Developments, Jada announced to her viewers, her voice echoing loudly and unprofessionally through the quiet reception area. Watch my brother take his rightful place as CEO today. We are here to reclaim our family's black excellence from a toxic, bitter woman who tried to steal his empire and hide it all for herself. Keep watching and hit that share button because this hostile takeover is going to be absolutely epic. Drop some fire emojis in the chat for the real boss of the family. Brenda, meanwhile, marched straight up to Sarah's reception desk. She leaned heavily over the pristine quartz counter, glaring down at my highly trained executive assistant with an expression of supreme arrogance. You might want to start packing your desk into a cardboard box right now, honey, Brenda ordered loudly, adjusting her massive, wide-brimmed church hat. There is a new boss taking over today, and we will not be keeping any of her disloyal, sneaky staff on the payroll. This whole place is about to be under new management, so you better call the unemployment office." Sarah, who had been fully briefed on the morning's schedule, simply blinked. She offered Brenda a polite, chillingly professional smile before gesturing toward the main conference room with a smooth sweep of her hand. "Right this way, please," Sarah said, completely unfazed by the harassment. DeAndre led his entourage down the main corridor, his chest puffed out like a conquering general. He threw open the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom, clearly expecting to find me pacing the room in a state of terrified panic. They charged in, ready for a brutal fight, only to freeze momentarily at the sight before them. I was seated perfectly centered at the head of the massive, custom-built marble conference table. I wore a tailored crimson suit that projected absolute, undeniable authority. A steaming cup of black coffee rested casually in my hand. Desmond sat directly to my right, his posture relaxed and confident, calmly arranging a small, neat stack of legal files. At the far end of the room, a large projector screen was already pulled down, glowing brightly, with the Nova Developments corporate logo. I did not stand up to greet them. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single word of welcome. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip from my ceramic mug and watched them file into my territory. Tyrell stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floor, breaking the tense silence. He marched to the opposite end of the long marble table, planted his feet, and slammed his heavy, calloused hand flat against the surface. The loud smack echoed sharply off the glass walls, a crude attempt at physical intimidation. "Let us cut the pleasantries," Nia Tyrell growled, leaning forward aggressively, so his face was illuminated by the glow of the projector screen. "Under Section 4 of our corporate operating agreement, I am officially exercising my 30% minority shareholder right. I am calling for an immediate binding vote of leadership change. Your recent hostile actions against your own family demonstrate gross instability and threaten the financial integrity of my investment. You are compromised, and I will not let you drag my money down with your messy personal life. Step down right now, or we force you out." Tyrell crossed his massive arms, glaring down the length of the table. "I have the votes, Naya. I have the proxy forms right here in my pocket. A 30% voting block, combined with a formal declaration of no confidence regarding your mental stability, is more than enough to trigger an emergency removal under state corporate bylaws. We can do this the easy way, where you resign for personal reasons, or we can do this the hard way, where I present evidence of your erratic behavior to the entire board and strip you of your equity for violating your fiduciary duties. Make your choice." DeAndre pulled out one of the plush, leather executive chairs and dropped into it, casually crossing his ankle over his knee. He leaned back, lacing his fingers together behind his head in a posture of complete, relaxed victory. "The game is over, Nia," DeAndre gloated, flashing a blinding, predatory smile. "You really thought you could lock me out of my own success. You thought you could play the quiet little victim while building a commercial real estate empire behind my back. But you forgot that blood always wins. I found your silent partner, and I made him a much better offer than you ever could." DeAndre laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the room. "Hand over the CEO title right now, sign over the login credentials for all corporate accounts, and walk away quietly. If you make this easy, maybe I will let you keep a tiny, silent percentage to live on. Maybe I will let you keep the penthouse. But if you fight this, Tyrell calls the vote right here, right now. We fire you for cause, and you walk away with absolutely nothing. Your little empire is mine either way." "You have 24 hours to vacate this office," DeAndre continued, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "But frankly, I do not even want to wait that long. I want your signature on the transfer documents before I finish my morning coffee. You are out of your league, Nia. You are playing a man's game, and it is time to hand the keys over to the real provider of this family. I am going to take Nova Developments and turn it into a national powerhouse, and everyone watching this live stream is going to witness the exact moment I took back what is rightfully mine." Jada eagerly circled the table, angling her camera to capture my reaction. She was practically vibrating with excitement, holding the lens mere inches from my face as she waited for my inevitable tearful breakdown. She wanted me to beg. They all did. They wanted the world to see the powerful, independent woman reduced to a sobbing, defeated mess. Brenda stood by the door, her arms crossed tight over her chest, nodding in smug agreement with every single word her son said. I looked at the four of them, taking in their arrogant posture, their greedy eyes, and their absolute certainty that they had just executed a flawless corporate coup. I sat there breathing evenly, letting their threats wash over me without leaving a single mark. Last night, after putting Trey to bed, I had spent hours reviewing the devastating digital dossier Marcus had compiled. I had seen the exact routing numbers Tyrell Vance used to funnel stolen capital into offshore Cayman accounts. I had stared at the digital receipt of DeAndre's pathetic, desperate bribe transferred directly from a highly monitored corporate account into Tyrell's illicit shell company. They were trying to threaten me with corporate bylaws, completely oblivious to the fact that they were both staring down the barrel of federal wire fraud charges. They thought this was a simple game of family intimidation. They had no idea they had just triggered a financial detonation that would obliterate both of their careers permanently. I carefully placed my coffee mug back onto its matching saucer. The soft clink of the ceramic was the only sound in the dead silent room. I folded my hands neatly on the cool marble table. I did not look at Tyrell. I did not look at DeAndre. I locked my eyes directly onto the glowing lens of Jada's camera. Are you absolutely sure the live stream is capturing the audio clearly? Jada, I asked, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade. I want to make sure your audience hears every single word of what happens next. Jada faltered the phone in her hand, dipping slightly as my cold, unyielding confidence completely derailed her carefully scripted narrative. Her eyes darted nervously between my calm expression and the screen of her phone, where thousands of people were currently watching her every move. She had expected tears. She had expected begging. She had absolutely no idea how to process a woman who was inviting the public humiliation with open arms. Keep that camera steady, Jada. Brenda snapped, her voice harsh and commanding, as she stepped out from the shadows near the door. Do not let her intimidate you. Show the world exactly how a real man takes back his family legacy from an ungrateful, disobedient woman. DeAndre let out a loud, arrogant chuckle, shaking his head as he leaned further back in the plush leather executive chair. He adjusted his expensive burgundy suit jacket, looking around the glass-walled boardroom with an expression of supreme ownership. You are playing a very dangerous game of bluff, Nia, he declared, his voice dripping with condescension. You think putting on a brave face for the internet is going to stop Tyrell from exercising his legal shareholder rights? You think a sharp red suit and a cup of coffee will rewrite corporate bylaws? Call the vote, Tyrell. Let us put an end to this pathetic charade right now. Tyrell sneered, slamming his heavy hand against the marble table one more time for added dramatic effect. You heard the man. Section 4, immediate leadership change due to hostile and erratic actions. You are out, Nia. Pack your bags. I did not blink. I slowly lowered my ceramic coffee mug to the saucer, the gentle clink echoing sharply through the tense room. I turned my attention away from DeAndre and focused entirely on the hulking construction magnate standing at the end of my table. Before we move forward with any official corporate voting, Tyrell, I think it is only fair that we review the current financial health of Vance Construction. I said, my voice smooth and lethal. After all, if you are attempting to seize control of my multi-million-dollar real estate firm to protect your investment, your own business acumen should be completely beyond reproach. I picked up the sleek silver presentation remote resting next to my legal pad. I pressed a single button. Behind Tyrell, the massive projector screen instantly hummed to life. The bright light washed over his broad shoulders, casting a harsh, glaring glow across the boardroom. Jada immediately angled her smartphone to capture the screen, her mouth dropping open in silent shock as the documents blazed into high definition. Displayed on the wall was a towering, highly detailed financial portfolio. The numbers were staggering, and nearly all of them were bleeding in dark, unforgiving red ink. Centered on the screen was a massive scanned commercial default notice bearing the official seal of the First Atlanta Heritage Bank. "What is this?" Tyrell demanded, his voice suddenly losing its aggressive boom. He spun around to look at the screen, his eyes widening in pure horror as he recognized the documents. "Where did you get these?" "This is highly confidential banking information." "It was confidential, Tyrell," I corrected smoothly, remaining perfectly still in my chair. Until 6 months ago, when Vance Construction officially became insolvent, the air in the boardroom seemed to vanish. DeAndre sat forward, his smug smile completely wiped from his face as he stared at the red numbers illuminating the wall. Brenda stopped adjusting her ridiculous purple church hat, her jaw going slack. Jada's hands began to shake, the camera gimbal swaying wildly as she inadvertently broadcast Tyrell's financial ruin to thousands of live viewers. "You see, Jada," I continued, speaking directly to the smartphone lens, "your cousin Tyrell loves to present himself as a wealthy, unstoppable construction titan. But the truth is, he has not paid a single one of his primary material vendors in over half a year. He has been systematically moving money through offshore shell accounts to cover his astronomical personal gambling debts. And exactly 3 months ago, he officially defaulted on a $2 million commercial loan." "That is a lie," Tyrell shouted, a thick layer of sweat instantly breaking out across his forehead. He pointed a trembling thick finger at me. "You hacked my servers. You fabricated those documents to save your own skin. This is corporate slander." Desmond finally moved. He reached into his slim leather briefcase and smoothly slid a thick, bound legal dossier across the polished marble table. It came to a stop mere inches from Tyrell's trembling hands. "There are no fabrications here, Mr. Vance." Desmond stated, his voice a calm, deep baritone that commanded absolute respect. "Those are certified bank records, federal tax liens, and official foreclosure warnings. First Atlanta Heritage Bank was preparing to seize every single piece of heavy machinery your company owns to recoup their losses. Your construction empire is nothing but a hollow house of cards waiting for a strong breeze." Tyrell swallowed hard, the color rapidly draining from his face. He looked frantically at DeAndre, seeking some kind of backup, but DeAndre was staring at the projector screen like he was watching a ghost. "But here is the truly fascinating part of high-level corporate finance," Tyrell, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. "Banks absolutely despise toxic assets. They hate the messy public process of foreclosing on construction equipment. They prefer immediate liquidity. So when a completely anonymous, highly capitalized holding company swooped in last week and offered to purchase your distressed debt for pennies on the dollar, the bank practically tripped over themselves to sign the transfer deeds." Tyrell's breath hitched loudly in the quiet room. He stared at me, his chest heaving, the terrifying realization slowly dawning in his eyes. "You bought my debt," he whispered, his voice cracking. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression devoid of any mercy. "I used the massive, entirely legitimate profits generated by Nova Developments to quietly purchase your entire distressed portfolio, Tyrell. I own your loans. I own your liens. I am your sole, absolute creditor." I stood up slowly, ensuring every eye in the room and every eye watching Jada's live stream was locked onto me. I smoothed the jacket of my crimson suit and walked down the length of the marble table until I was standing face to face with the man who had come to steal my company. Tyrell towered over me physically, but in that moment, he looked incredibly small. "I am your sole creditor, Tyrell," I repeated, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "And here is my ultimatum. If you utter a single word to exercise your voting rights against me in this room today, I will officially call in that $2 million debt by exactly 5 o'clock this evening. I will file the paperwork to seize your cranes, your bulldozers, your flatbed trucks, and your corporate headquarters. I will freeze your payroll accounts before your employees can cash their Friday checks. I will bankrupt you so thoroughly and so publicly that you will never lay another brick in this state for the rest of your natural life." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound in the room was the harsh, ragged breathing coming from Tyrell's panic-stricken chest. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff staring down into an endless abyss. Jada's phone began to chime relentlessly. The live chat was exploding with thousands of rapid-fire comments. Her viewers who had tuned in expecting to see my downfall were now ruthlessly mocking Tyrell. They were laughing at his fake wealth tearing apart his reputation and cheering for the woman in the red suit who had just executed a flawless financial guillotine. Tyrell stepped back from the table, his hands raised in a gesture of pure surrender. He turned his panicked, furious gaze toward DeAndre. "You told me she was broke," Tyrell roared, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "You told me she was destitute. You told me this was going to be an easy, clean extraction. You never told me she had the capital to buy out my banknotes." "I did not know," DeAndre shouted back, shooting out of his chair. "She has been hiding assets. She is a fraud. Tyrell, do not let her intimidate you. Call the vote. We will fight the debt in court. I will pay your legal fees. Call the vote right now." "Are you out of your mind?" Tyrell yelled, wiping the heavy sweat from his face with the back of his hand. "She holds my execution papers in her hand right now. You set me up. You used me to fight your miserable little domestic battles, and you walked me right into a financial slaughterhouse. I am done with you. I am done with this family." Desmond stood up holding a single sheet of paper and a heavy silver fountain pen. He extended them toward Tyrell with absolute unbothered grace. "This is a formal proxy waiver and a voluntary transfer of your 30% voting rights directly to Ms. Davis," Desmond explained smoothly. "Sign this document waiving all rights to initiate leadership changes, and Ms. Davis will graciously grant you a standard 30-day grace period to restructure your outstanding debt payments. Refuse to sign and the collection process begins immediately." Tyrell did not even hesitate. He snatched the silver pen from Desmond's hand and scrawled his signature across the bottom of the proxy waiver with violent, desperate strokes. He threw the pen down onto the marble table, refusing to look me in the eye. "Keep your grace period, Nia," Tyrell muttered, his voice shaking with absolute humiliation. "I will find the money. Just keep those debt collectors away from my sights." Without waiting for a response, Tyrell turned on his heel and fled the boardroom. He practically sprinted down the glass corridor, desperate to escape the building, the live stream, and the total destruction of his reputation. The heavy double doors swung shut behind him, leaving a profound, echoing silence in his wake. I picked up the proxy waiver, examined Tyrell's desperate signature, and handed the document back to Desmond. The hostile takeover was officially dead. I remained the undisputed, untouchable Chief Executive Officer of Nova Developments. Brenda looked like she was hyperventilating. She clutched her massive Bible to her chest, her eyes darting nervously around the room as if searching for a divine rescue that was never going to come. Jada had lowered her camera, her mouth hanging open in silent, terrified shock as she watched her powerful cousin flee the building like a beaten dog. But DeAndre, despite watching his entire corporate conspiracy crumble into dust before his very eyes, refused to surrender. His narcissism simply would not allow him to accept total defeat. The vein in his forehead throbbed wildly as he stepped around the boardroom table, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "So what?" DeAndre spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of intense rage and desperate arrogance. "So what if you managed to scare off Tyrell? You just bought yourself a few more months of playing CEO. You think this makes you untouchable? I am still your husband under the law. We do not have a prenuptial agreement. I am still dragging you through family court. I will demand half of this entire company in the divorce settlement. I will demand massive permanent spousal support to maintain the lifestyle I have become accustomed to. I will tie you up in endless litigation, and I will drag this out until your reputation is completely ruined." He took a step closer, his eyes wild and manic. "You won the boardroom, Nia, but I am still taking my son, and I am still taking your money." I looked at him, taking in his flushed face, his expensive burgundy suit, and the sheer unadulterated delusion that kept him standing upright. I felt a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small encrypted flash drive. "I have something for you too, DeAndre," I said softly, my voice ringing with total, inescapable finality. I turned my gaze toward the woman shivering in the corner. "And I have something for you, Brenda." I kept my gaze locked entirely on Brenda. She pressed her massive leather-bound Bible against her chest like a physical shield, her knuckles stark white from the force of her grip. Her eyes darted nervously between my face and the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, clearly realizing that the corporate slaughterhouse she had enthusiastically marched into was actually meant for her. I pressed the silver button on my presentation remote. The massive projector screen behind me blinked, shifting away from Tyrell's disastrous, bleeding financial records. A stark, high-contrast audio waveform appeared on the wall, frozen in absolute silence. I turned my attention to the far side of the boardroom table. "Keep recording, Jada," I commanded, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade. "You brought your entire audience here today to witness a spectacular downfall. You promised them a show. It would be a terrible shame to cut the live feed just when the plot is finally getting good. Make sure that lens is perfectly focused. We want maximum clarity." Jada faltered, but the grip on her camera gimbal tightened. She was too addicted to the digital engagement, too hungry for the viral spectacle to turn the camera off. She angled the lens to capture both my face and the glowing projector screen, entirely unaware that she was about to broadcast the execution of her own family. I looked back at DeAndre. "You really thought you were the smartest person in the city, DeAndre. You spent the last 12 months treating me like a naive, desperate woman who was completely oblivious to her surroundings. You thought I was just being hysterical when I accused you of having my car tracked. You thought I was simply acting paranoid when I changed the locks on my apartment and refused to let you inside. But I was never paranoid. I was observant. 6 weeks ago, I hired a premier private security firm. I had them sweep my vehicle, secure my digital networks, and put a highly licensed private investigator on my payroll." DeAndre stiffened, the arrogant slump of his shoulders suddenly snapping into rigid attention. "You thought that extravagant reconciliation dinner at the steakhouse was your masterstroke?" I continued, my voice smooth and lethal. "You orchestrated that entire massive seafood feast, completely convinced you had cornered me into paying for your gluttonous display. You thought you were holding all the cards, but you completely failed to notice the staff, that highly attentive waiter who kept refilling your sparkling water. The one I leaned over and whispered to right before I walked out the front door and left you holding the check. He was my lead investigator, and he was wearing a highly sensitive military-grade concealed microphone." I pressed the remote again. The pristine, undeniable acoustics of the steakhouse hallway filled the Nova Development's boardroom. The background noise of clinking crystal glasses, soft jazz music, and distant conversational chatter was crystal clear. And then, cutting violently through the ambient sound, came DeAndre's voice. It was not his polished, charming, public-facing persona. It was the vicious, arrogant sneer he reserved strictly for when he thought no one else was listening. "Mom, relax." DeAndre's recorded voice echoed off the glass walls. "I only invited the dumb broad so we could stick her with the bill and guilt her into co-signing the loan for my new condo. She is desperate for a family. She will pay it. She always pays it. She is too weak to cause a scene in a place like this." A collective, sharp intake of breath sucked the air out of the boardroom, but the recording was not finished. Then came Brenda's voice. The sweet, pious, God-fearing inflection she had used in the courtroom, the gentle tone she used at Sunday service was completely absent. Her voice was sharp, calculating, and dripping with malicious, undeniable venom. "Just make sure Jada gets it on video so we can use it to keep her in line," Brenda's recorded voice instructed coldly. "I cannot stand the girl, but her credit score is the only thing useful about her. Once she co-signs that mortgage, we can finally stop pretending to tolerate her presence. We get the condo, and we push her right back out into the street." I hit the mute button, leaving a deafening, heavy silence in the executive boardroom. DeAndre sat paralyzed in his plush leather chair, his jaw hanging slightly open. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. The arrogant, untouchable corporate titan he had been playing just seconds ago evaporated into absolutely nothing. He was completely exposed. The illusion of the wealthy, unbothered provider providing for his family was shattered, revealing a broke, desperate con artist begging his ex-wife to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. On the other side of the table, Jada let out a sharp, panicked gasp. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The heavy camera gimbal slipped from her grip, clattering loudly against the polished marble surface. The phone landed face up the screen, still broadcasting the live feed to her massive following. I did not even need to look at the screen to know exactly what was happening. Jada scrambled to pick up the device, her eyes darting frantically across the scrolling text. The thousands of viewers who had tuned in to eagerly watch my downfall were instantly turning on them. The narrative had completely flipped in a matter of seconds. The entire viral TikTok smear campaign, the meticulously crafted narrative that I was a bitter, destitute, deadbeat mother, abandoning a loving father, had just been definitively exposed as a malicious, premeditated extortion scam. The chat was exploding with unadulterated outrage. The supportive fire emojis were instantly replaced by furious condemnations, trash can emojis, and rapid-fire accusations. They were calling out the extortion. They were tagging local Atlanta news outlets. They were tagging the local police department. Jada's carefully curated platform of family loyalty and fake black excellence was burning to the ground in real time. She frantically tapped the screen, desperately trying to end the broadcast, but her fingers were trembling too violently to hit the correct buttons. She watched her follower count begin to hemorrhage right before her eyes. But Brenda's reaction was far more visceral. The wholly untouchable matriarch persona shattered into a million jagged pieces. She dropped her massive Bible onto the floor with a heavy, disrespectful thud. She gripped the edges of the boardroom table, her chest heaving as she began to rapidly hyperventilate. The realization of what had just happened struck her with the force of a freight train. Every single member of her prestigious church congregation, every woman in her elite social circles, every neighbor she had ever gossiped to, they were all watching this live stream. Her pious, unblemished reputation was instantly incinerated in front of her entire community. She had been caught on a crystal-clear recording actively plotting to financially exploit the mother of her own grandson. She had been exposed as a cruel, calculating fraud who weaponized her religion to cover her own greed. "This is a trick," Brenda gasped, her voice shrill and breathy as she struggled to pull air into her panicked lungs. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me, backing away from the table as if the marble surface had suddenly caught fire. "That is not my voice. You fabricated this. You used a computer. You used artificial intelligence to fake this recording. I am a woman of God. I would never say such wicked things. You are trying to frame me. You are trying to ruin my good name." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands neatly in my lap. I watched her full-blown panic attack with absolute unbothered tranquility. The frantic, terrified energy radiating from their side of the table was a stark, poetic contrast to the quiet discipline I had maintained for an entire year. They had pushed me into a corner, expecting me to break, expecting me to surrender my assets, my company, and my child. They had severely underestimated the depth of my preparation. They had walked into my building expecting a slaughter, never realizing they were the ones on the chopping block. I let Brenda's desperate, hyperventilating denials fill the room for a few moments longer. I wanted her to feel the full, suffocating weight of public exposure. I wanted her to realize that there was no scripture she could quote, no prayer she could offer, that would undo the audio recording currently circulating across the internet. Then I picked up the silver presentation remote once more. I leveled my gaze, looking directly into Brenda's terrified, wide eyes. "That audio file destroys your precious reputation, Brenda," I said, my voice eerily calm and ringing with undeniable authority. "It proves to the entire world exactly what kind of hateful, manipulative fraud you truly are. But you are absolutely right to be terrified, because this next slide, this destroys your freedom." I pressed the final button on the remote, shifting the projector to the very last slide of my presentation. The audio waveform of their malicious conversation vanished, replaced instantly by a stark, high-resolution spreadsheet. It was not a complex, interwoven corporate portfolio like the one that had just sent Tyrell running for his life. It was a simple, brutal, and highly organized list of direct wire transfers. The dates were bolded in sharp black ink. The transfer amounts were highlighted in bright, unforgiving yellow. Jada's phone, still resting face up on the polished marble table, captured the glowing screen perfectly. The live chat beside the video feed had become a rapid, unreadable blur of furious text. Thousands of viewers were watching the real-time dissection of a family that had spent months selling them a fraudulent narrative of victimhood. I locked my eyes directly onto DeAndre. He was staring at the spreadsheet, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. I have spent the last 3 months watching you parade around Atlanta in custom-tailored suits, driving a newly leased European sports car, and acting like an untouchable billionaire, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the dead-silent boardroom. But the math never added up, DeAndre. I know exactly what your personal bank accounts look like, because I spent years paying your overdraft fees. I always wondered how you suddenly afforded a high-profile $600 an hour divorce attorney. I wondered how you happily paid for a lavish 30-person private dining room at an elite steakhouse while being completely broke and chronically unemployed. You do not have the credit score to finance a kitchen appliance, let alone a premier corporate litigation team. DeAndre tried to swallow, but his throat was visibly dry. His confident, predatory posture had entirely collapsed, leaving him slumped in the plush executive chair like a deflated balloon. I turned my attention to the woman trembling near the door. "Look very closely at the screen, Brenda," I instructed coldly. Brenda slowly turned her head. Her eyes, wide and terrified, scanned the massive columns of numbers projected onto the wall. She clutched her Bible so tightly her knuckles looked like they might snap through her skin. "Those are routing numbers," I explained, walking slowly around the edge of the heavy marble table, ensuring my voice carried the full weight of her incoming destruction. "Look at the originating account listed in the left column. First, Mount Zion Church Building Fund. The exact same community fund your congregation has been faithfully donating their hard-earned money to for the past 4 years. The fund meant to repair the leaking roof of the sanctuary and build a new community center for disadvantaged youth. The fund that you exclusively manage as the highly respected, untouchable head treasurer." Brenda let out a small, strangled whimper. She shook her head back and forth, a pathetic, desperate attempt to deny the objective reality, blazing in high definition right in front of her. "And now look at the destination account in the right column." I continued, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor with each step. A newly formed shell company named Apex Holdings, LLC. It was registered anonymously in Delaware, a very clever attempt to hide the ownership structure. But unfortunately for you both, my private investigator is exceptionally thorough. The banking endpoints for Apex Holdings trace directly to your personal checking account, DeAndre. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Even the sound of the city traffic through the thick glass windows seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but the inescapable truth hovering in the air. "You didn't just try to scam me, DeAndre," I stated, my voice ringing with a mix of disgust and absolute triumph. "You and your mother embezzled $85,000 from your own congregation. You stole from elderly women living on fixed incomes who put their folding money into the collection plate every Sunday. You robbed your own pastor. You stole the roof off your own church to fund your pathetic fake luxury lifestyle and to pay for your aggressive legal fees against me. You weaponized your mother's holy reputation to bleed your community dry just so you could pretend to be a successful provider on the internet." The moment the full magnitude of the accusation settled over the room, the illusion of their superiority shattered completely. Brenda's legs gave out. She collapsed, her knees hitting the hard floor with a sickening thud. The heavy Bible slipped from her grasp, sliding across the polished wood. She threw her hands over her face, throwing her head back, as a loud, guttural wail ripped from her throat. It was a terrifying sound of absolute, unadulterated ruin. She rocked back and forth on her knees, crying hysterically, knowing that every single member of First Mount Zion was likely watching Jada's live stream right now. She had not just lost her social standing, she had lost her community, her identity, and her entire false sense of righteousness. "No," Brenda sobbed, her voice muffled behind her shaking hands. "Lord, no, please. It was a loan. We were going to pay it back. DeAndre promised me he would pay it back once he got the settlement money. It was just a temporary transfer." Her panicked confession echoed through the boardroom, officially sealing their fate on a hot microphone in front of a massive online audience. DeAndre's eyes snapped toward his mother, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. "Shut up!" he roared, his voice cracking wildly. "Shut your mouth right now!" He spun his head back toward me. The panic in his eyes had been entirely replaced by a blind, destructive rage. His entire fragile ego had just been publicly pulverized. The world now knew he was not a wealthy titan of industry, but a pathetic thief, stealing church donations from his own mother. His brain simply could not process the total annihilation of his carefully constructed reality. "I am going to kill you!" DeAndre screamed, the sound tearing out of his chest like a wild animal. He kicked his heavy leather chair backward, sending it crashing into the glass wall. He lunged across the wide marble table, his hands outstretched, his fingers, hooked like claws, aiming directly for my throat. He did not care about the camera anymore. He did not care about the money. He only wanted to destroy the woman who had stripped him of his power. I did not flinch. I did not even take a single step backward. I simply watched him launch himself across the smooth stone surface. Before DeAndre could even clear the halfway point of the massive conference table, Desmond moved. My legal counsel, who had been sitting quietly and observing the entire proceeding with calculated stillness, proved exactly why he was worth his exorbitant retainer fee. Desmond surged upward with terrifying speed, grabbing DeAndre by the lapels of his expensive burgundy suit jacket mid-lunge. With a sharp practiced twist of his hips, Desmond yanked DeAndre off balance, slamming him face first onto the hard marble with a bone-rattling crash. Simultaneously, the heavy double doors of the executive boardroom flew open, rebounding violently against the walls. The two massive building security guards I had stationed in the hallway, specifically for this exact moment, charged into the room. They swarmed the table, moving with aggressive, tactical precision. They grabbed DeAndre by his shoulders, hauling him roughly off the marble surface and throwing him face down onto the hardwood floor. One guard planted a heavy knee squarely into the center of DeAndre's back, pinning him down while expertly twisting his arm up behind his shoulder blade. "Get off me!" DeAndre thrashed, screaming incoherently as he struggled wildly against the heavy weight of the security personnel. "Get off me! You cannot do this! I own this company! I am her husband! You are a trespasser committing a violent assault on private property," Desmond stated coldly, adjusting his cuffs and straightening his tie as he looked down at the writhing man on the floor. "And you are officially restrained." Brenda's wailing grew louder, her shrieks echoing off the glass as she watched her son tackled to the ground. Jada was backed completely into the corner of the room, her hands clamped over her mouth in silent terror, realizing that the viral stunt she had eagerly participated in had just escalated into a violent criminal catastrophe. I stood at the head of the table, perfectly composed, looking down at the chaotic, pathetic mess they had made of themselves. I reached over, picking up Jada's phone from the table. The chat was moving so fast, the text was completely illegible. A massive blur of shock, vindication, and absolute digital destruction. I tilted the screen down, making sure the lens captured DeAndre pinned to the floor and Brenda sobbing hysterically on her knees. Then I turned the camera back to my own face. To everyone watching, I said, my voice calm, steady, and projecting the absolute authority of a woman who had just reclaimed her life. "Thank you for tuning in to the hostile takeover of Nova Developments. I think it is safe to say that current management will be remaining in place." I pressed the red button on the screen, instantly terminating the live broadcast and plunging millions of viewers into darkness. I set the phone face down on the marble. The show was officially over. Now came the consequences. The boardroom doors, which had remained open after the security guards charged in, suddenly filled with new figures. The frantic screaming from Brenda and the aggressive struggling from DeAndre abruptly ceased as the authoritative heavy footsteps entered the room. I looked toward the entrance, a slow, satisfied smile finally breaking across my face. Standing in the doorway were two men in sharp, unassuming dark suits, their federal badges clearly visible clipped to their belts. Flanking them was a uniformed detective from the Atlanta Police Department Financial Crimes Division holding a thick stack of official warrants. I had forwarded the entire digital dossier containing the bank transfers, the shell company registration, and the church ledger discrepancies directly to the local field office 48 hours ago. I knew they were waiting in the lobby. I had just been buying time to ensure the confession was caught on tape. DeAndre Davis and Brenda Davis, the lead FBI agent, announced, his voice booming with the heavy, inescapable weight of federal authority. You are both under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, grand larceny, and felony embezzlement. The lead agent stepped into the room, flanked by two others who immediately moved to secure the suspects. The sharp metallic ratcheting of steel handcuffs echoed loudly against the marble and glass. Desmond stepped aside smoothly, allowing the officers to pull DeAndre up from the floor. His expensive burgundy suit was now wrinkled and smeared with dust from the hardwood floor. His arms were wrenched behind his back, the silver cuffs biting deeply into his wrists. Brenda did not fare any better. An agent gently but firmly grasped her arms, pulling her up from her kneeling position. She shrieked a high-pitched sound of absolute indignation, shaking her head wildly. She demanded they call her pastor. She demanded they check her bank statements again. She demanded they arrest me instead. The agent simply recited her Miranda rights in a board-practiced monotone, completely unfazed by her hysterical tears. The procession out of the boardroom was a perfectly executed march of shame. The officers guided DeAndre and Brenda through the heavy double doors and out into the main executive corridor. Earlier that morning, they had strutted down this exact hallway like conquering monarchs. Now they were being paraded out like common criminals. My employees had stepped out of their offices, drawn by the commotion. Dozens of highly paid architects, financial analysts, and project managers stood in dead silence watching the spectacle. Sarah, my executive assistant, stood perfectly upright at her pristine quartz reception desk. When Brenda locked eyes with her, desperately looking for a shred of sympathy, Sarah offered the exact same chillingly professional smile she had given her 2 hours prior. Jada completely snapped. She shrieked her brother's name, stumbling over her own feet as she sprinted out of the boardroom to chase after the officers. She was crying hysterically, begging the agents to let them go, screaming that this was all a massive misunderstanding. In her frantic rush to follow her mother and brother into the elevator lobby, she completely forgot the one thing she valued most in the world. Her smartphone remained abandoned on the boardroom floor, its battery finally dying, the screen fading to black. The fallout over the next several weeks was absolute, ruthless, and incredibly efficient. The internet, notoriously unforgiving to those who fake their victimhood, descended upon Jada like a swarm of locusts. The millions of viewers who had watched her live-streamed humiliation immediately mobilized. They mass-reported every single one of her social media accounts across every platform. Within 48 hours, her entire digital footprint was permanently wiped from the internet. Her sponsors dropped her instantly, citing breach of morality clauses. When she tried to create new anonymous accounts to defend herself, users recognized her voice and immediately flagged her into oblivion. She was digitally exiled, forced to return to the real world with absolutely zero marketable skills and a thoroughly destroyed reputation. Brenda's destruction was far more traditional but equally devastating. The elders of First Mount Zion Church called an emergency board meeting the very night of her arrest. Confronted with the undeniable wire transfer records provided by federal prosecutors, the church leadership wasted no time. Brenda was formally excommunicated by a unanimous vote. The women in her elite social circles, the same women she had spent decades gossiping with and judging others alongside, completely severed all contact. Her calls went straight to voicemail. Her letters were returned unopened. She was left entirely isolated to face the reality of her impending federal trial, trading her massive collection of wide-brimmed church hats for a standard-issue county jail jumpsuit. She cried to her public defender that she had been tricked, but the paper trail of the stolen church funds was absolute. She was looking at a minimum of 5 years in federal prison. DeAndre's reality check was the most brutal of all. His high-priced $600 an hour lawyer officially withdrew as his counsel the exact moment his retainer check bounced due to the federal freeze on all of DeAndre's assets. He was assigned an overworked public defender who advised him to take a plea deal. Because he was deemed a flight risk with access to offshore shell accounts, the judge outright denied him bail. He sat in a cold concrete holding cell, stripped of his burgundy suits and his arrogant swagger. The fraternity brothers who had hyped him up online, the men who had applauded his attempts to steal my company and praised his false narrative of being an oppressed father, completely disavowed him. They deleted him from their group chats. They removed him from their golf outings. When reporters reached out for comments, they claimed they barely knew him and strongly condemned his actions. DeAndre was left with nothing but the echoing silence of his cell, a man who had tried to steal an empire only to lose his absolute freedom. Far away from the fluorescent lights of the county jail and the bitter ruins of DeAndre's life, I finally returned to the quiet sanctuary of my Buckhead penthouse. I stepped through the heavy oak doors, slipping off my heels and letting the absolute stillness of my home wash over me. I walked across the imported hardwood floors, moving past the sleek modern furniture and the towering bookshelves that lined the walls. I opened the floor-to-ceiling glass doors and stepped out onto the expansive wraparound balcony. The evening air was warm and pleasant. Below me, the sprawling Atlanta skyline glittered like a sea of diamonds. The sun was just beginning to set, casting deep ribbons of gold violet and burning crimson across the horizon. The city hummed with life, a vibrant, unstoppable force that mirrored the energy running through my own veins. I leaned against the cool glass railing, taking a deep, cleansing breath. For the first time in an entire year, I was not looking over my shoulder. I was not checking my car for tracking devices. I was not bracing myself for the next legal threat or the next digital smear campaign. The war was officially over, and I was the only one left standing. A sudden, joyful squeal broke my quiet contemplation. I turned around just as the sliding glass doors opened wider. Trey came running out onto the balcony, his little legs moving as fast as they could carry him. He was giggling uncontrollably, his eyes bright with innocent joy, clutching a bright yellow toy dump truck tightly against his chest. He looked so happy, so completely untouched by the darkness that had tried to swallow our family whole. Mama Trey yelled, dropping the toy truck onto the balcony floor and launching himself at my legs. I smiled, a wide, genuine expression of pure love. I bent down and scooped him up into my arms, pulling his warm, solid weight against my chest. He wrapped his small arms securely around my neck, resting his head on my shoulder. I buried my face in his soft curls, breathing in the scent of his baby shampoo, and pressed a long, lingering kiss to his cheek. I held my son and looked back out over the glittering city skyline. I was no longer the victim of a malicious smear campaign. I was no longer the frightened woman trying to appease a greedy, narcissistic husband. I was the chief executive officer of my own destiny. I was the architect of my own life. My corporate empire was permanently secured. My personal wealth was untouchable. My son was safe, shielded entirely from the toxic manipulation that had threatened to infect his childhood. I had weathered the storm, outsmarted my enemies, and protected everything that mattered to me. The air was clear, the future was bright, and the trash had finally taken itself out. Fade to black.